A common misconception about consumer debt is that the institution lending the money is the same one that will ultimately collect it. When an individual stops paying a credit card bill, the original bank does not pursue the balance indefinitely. Instead, the modern financial system relies on a highly structured secondary market where unpaid obligations are commodified, bundled, and auctioned off to the highest bidder. This commodified obligation is known as distressed debt, a technical term referring to financial assets in default or nearing insolvency. After typically 180 days of non-payment, original creditors write off these delinquent accounts as losses for internal tax purposes. The accounts are then packaged into massive data files containing thousands of consumer profiles, transforming individual financial struggles into tradable corporate assets. The scale of this secondary market is vast, acting as a shadow ecosystem operating quietly within the broader financial sector. Major banks sell these massive debt portfolios to third-party debt buyers to immediately recoup a fraction of their initial capital losses. This transfer of ownership injects critical liquidity back into the primary lending market, allowing banks to issue new credit without carrying the dead weight of defaulted loans. Third-party debt buyers purchase these portfolios for literal pennies on the dollar, utilizing a pricing model based on rigorous actuarial risk assessment. A corporate buyer might pay just 4 cents for every dollar of a $1 million debt portfolio. The mathematical logic is remarkably simple, relying on the statistical probability that they only need to recover a tiny percentage of the total face value to generate substantial profit margins. This discounted pricing mechanism completely alters the incentive structure of modern debt recovery. Because the debt buyer acquired the delinquent account so cheaply, they possess immense financial flexibility in how they choose to pursue the consumer. They can comfortably afford to accept a settlement for half the original balance and still achieve a massive return on their investment, explaining the seemingly generous settlement offers consumers often receive. When a debt portfolio changes hands in this secondary market, the buyer receives only a basic spreadsheet of information, often lacking original signed contracts or complete billing histories. This digital data transfer usually includes just the consumer name, last known physical address, social security number, and the final balance owed. The lack of comprehensive documentation creates a systemic vulnerability, leading to frequent instances where debts are pursued against the wrong person. To govern this aggressive secondary market, the federal government established the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, commonly referred to as the FDCPA. Enacted to eliminate abusive and predatory practices, this powerful legislation dictates exactly how, when, and where third-party debt collectors can communicate with consumers. It forms the foundational legal framework protecting individuals from harassment, deception, and unfair financial coercion in the modern credit landscape. Under the strict guidelines of the FDCPA, debt collectors are explicitly prohibited from calling consumers before 8 in the morning or after 9 at night in the local time zone. They cannot use profane language, threaten physical harm, or falsely claim to be law enforcement officers. Furthermore, they are legally barred from discussing the debt with uninvolved third parties, such as neighbors or employers, which historically served as a brutal tactic for public humiliation. Beyond behavioral restrictions, the collection industry is heavily constrained by the passage of time, specifically governed by a legal mechanism known as the statute of limitations. This legal concept establishes a strict timeline during which a creditor or a third-party debt buyer can successfully sue a consumer in court for an unpaid balance. Depending on the state and the specific type of debt, this window typically ranges from 3 to 10 years. Once a consumer debt surpasses this specific legal time frame, it officially becomes time-barred, stripping the debt buyer of their most powerful collection weapon, which is the threat of a lawsuit and subsequent wage garnishment. However, a critical counterintuitive rule is that the expiration of the statute of limitations does not actually erase the debt itself. The consumer still technically owes the money, and collectors retain the legal right to ask for voluntary payment indefinitely. This sharp dichotomy between legal collectability and the right to simply request payment drives the underlying psychology of modern debt collection. Collectors rely heavily on the consumer lacking basic knowledge of their own legal standing. They utilize urgent language and official-sounding notices to create a false sense of immediate legal peril, banking on the psychological pressure of a perceived lawsuit to extract payments on debts they cannot enforce in court. Debts that are legally time-barred or previously settled are frequently resurrected in the secondary market, creating what the financial industry calls zombie debt. Because debt portfolios are sold, repackaged, and resold multiple times among different collection agencies, the underlying data degrades and fragments with each subsequent transaction. A consumer might find themselves aggressively pursued by a new agency for a debt they successfully discharged in bankruptcy a decade prior. The most dangerous mechanical trap hidden within the zombie debt ecosystem involves accidentally resetting the statute of limitations. In many states, making even a single partial payment, or sometimes simply acknowledging the validity of the debt over a recorded phone call, will instantly restart the legal clock from day one. A consumer attempting to do the right thing by sending a $20 goodwill payment inadvertently restores the right of the collector to sue for the entire balance. To safely navigate this complex legal landscape, consumers are granted specific actionable tools under federal law, the most powerful being the formal debt validation letter. When a third-party agency first contacts a consumer, the individual has precisely 30 days to request formal verification of the debt in writing. This legal maneuver forces the agency to immediately pause all collection efforts until they can produce original documentation proving they legally own the debt. Because large debt portfolios are frequently sold with missing or incomplete historical records, many third-party buyers simply cannot produce the required validation documents when challenged. When an agency fails to validate a debt within the legal framework, they are strictly prohibited from continuing collection efforts or reporting the unverified account to the major credit bureaus. This mechanism effectively leverages the systemic inefficiency of the institutional data transfer against the collection agency. The intersection of third-party debt collection and consumer credit scoring introduces another critical layer of financial mechanics. Collection agencies frequently use credit reporting as a secondary form of leverage, placing severe derogatory marks on a consumer credit profile to intentionally damage their FICO score. This aggressive tactic restricts the ability of the consumer to secure future mortgages or auto loans, effectively weaponizing the centralized credit reporting system to compel immediate payment. However, just as the judicial system has a statute of limitations for lawsuits, the credit reporting system has its own strict expiration mechanics governing negative data. The Fair Credit Reporting Act mandates that most negative information, including third-party collection accounts, must be completely removed from a credit report after 7 years and 180 days from the original delinquency date. A debt buyer cannot legally extend this reporting period by purchasing the account. If the debt validation process fails to resolve the issue, or if a consumer simply wishes to end the psychological pressure of constant contact, the FDCPA provides the absolute right to issue a cease and desist order. By sending a formal written notice, a consumer can legally force a debt collector to stop all communication immediately. The agency is only permitted one final contact to acknowledge the request or inform the consumer of a specific legal action. Issuing a cease and desist is a highly strategic maneuver that forces the debt buyer to make an immediate mathematical decision regarding their asset. They must calculate whether the outstanding balance is large enough and the consumer assets visible enough to justify the heavy financial expense of formal litigation. If the debt is relatively small or legally time-barred, the agency will typically close the account and quietly sell it off to the next buyer. Zooming out to examine the macroeconomy, the debt-buying industry serves as a crucial pressure relief valve for the global credit ecosystem. By absorbing billions of dollars in defaulted consumer loans, these agencies allow primary lenders to maintain lower interest rates and broader credit access for the general public. Without the ability to efficiently sell off bad debt, major banks would be forced to tighten their lending standards dramatically, restricting capital access for millions. Understanding these underlying mechanics transforms the experience of debt collection from an intimidating personal attack into a predictable, highly regulated business transaction. Collectors are not moral arbiters of financial responsibility. They are simply corporate employees executing an actuarial algorithm based on discounted asset pricing. Recognizing this objective reality removes the emotional weight from the interaction, allowing the informed consumer to respond with calculated legal precision rather than fear. True mastery of personal finance requires understanding both how wealth is actively built and how financial failures are systematically processed by the institutional banking system. By leveraging the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, understanding the critical nature of the statute of limitations, and recognizing the structural vulnerabilities of third-party debt buyers, individuals can vigorously defend their financial health. The architecture of consumer credit law exists to ensure that a temporary financial mistake does not become a permanent sentence of ruin.